All right, today we're jumping into a really interesting commentary from Sky News Australia that gives a pretty dramatic take on US politics. We're going to break down how it describes some leaders as BS artists, what it says about Donald Trump's strategy, and its argument that there's a major double standard in the media.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll get familiar with the source material. Then we'll look at the pretty sharp critiques aimed at two specific Democratic leaders. After that, we'll see how the commentary contrasts them with Donald Trump. And finally, we'll dig into its claims about media hypocrisy and wrap it all up.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1 and get right to the source.
So what are we looking at here? Well, our source for this breakdown is a commentary segment from Sky News Australia. It features the host, Danica, and her guest, Alec. And together, they lay out a very distinct view on American politics. And we're going to walk through their main points. The commentary doesn't pull any punches. It jumps straight into some really sharp critiques of two prominent Democratic leaders, who the guest goes so far as to call BS artists. And first on the list is New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdani. The whole thing kicks off with this quote from the mayor. He's talking about the connection between his Muslim faith and the identity of New York City. And this statement, it becomes the jumping-off point for the commentary's first big argument. But then right away, the guest, Alec, he completely flips the script. He argues that by focusing on this idea of being intertwined, the mayor is deliberately ignoring what the commentary sees as a much more serious issue, the legacy of 9/11 and the so-called threat of radical Islam. And this is where things get, well, personal. Really personal. The guest starts listing off a series of accusations, hitting on everything from college applications to his family members. You can kind of see the strategy here, right? It shifts the focus away from policy and puts it squarely on the mayor's character, wrapping it all up by calling him the best orator of BS since Obama. Okay, so after the personal stuff, the focus shifts a bit to policy. The source claims the mayor misidentified the cause of an attack. But then it makes a much bigger point. It argues his election was won because of what the guest calls outside invaders. Basically, voters not born in America who, in their view, just don't have that emotional tie to 9/11. Next up, they use pretty much the same playbook on another big-name Democrat, California's Governor Gavin Newsom. And this quote, it really sums up their whole take. Newsom is painted as a guy who looks the part, you know? He's polished, he fits the suit, but the guest argues that his policies have been a disaster, causing a mass exodus from the state. The main idea is that the reality on the ground just doesn't match his slick image. So after tearing down these Democratic leaders as, all talk, the segment does a complete 180. It presents a totally different style of leadership, holding up Donald Trump as the gold standard for being decisive. So how exactly does the commentary make this case for Trump being so effective? Well, they boil his whole strategy down to this really simple, almost predictable formula. It's basically a two-step process. Step 1, he lays down a really clear, direct ultimatum. And step 2, and this is the part they really hammer home, he actually follows through. No messing around. The argument is that unlike other politicians, when he says something, he does it. And to prove their point, they bring up a few examples of people they say underestimated him. They mention Venezuela's Maduro, former FBI Director James Comey, and the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. According to the guest, every single one of them called Trump's bluff and ended up facing some serious consequences. So the bottom line from the source is crystal clear. When Trump issues an ultimatum, like that 48-hour warning he supposedly gave to Iran, the world should probably take him at his word. Okay, so this whole theme of, who's authentic and who's a hypocrite, that keeps going. The conversation pivots again, this time to look at how the media, and what the source calls the left, reacts to things. And what sparks this whole part of the debate? It's this social media post, which the hosts say came from Donald Trump right after former FBI Director Robert Mueller passed away. So the guest points to this post and says, see, there's a huge double standard here. He contrasts the outrage over what Trump said with what he claims was people celebrating online after conservative activist Charlie Kirk was physically attacked. The argument is that the left only gets upset when it suits them. So what's fascinating is how they frame this. Something that a lot of people would see as a huge political mistake, they turn it around. They argue this bluntness isn't a bug, it's a feature. They say it's the very authenticity his supporters value, and that his unfiltered style is exactly why they love him.
All right, let's take a step back now and put all the pieces together. What's the big picture narrative that this Sky News segment is painting for its audience?
So, when you lay it all out, you get a really clear story, right? On one side, you have Democratic leaders who are painted as polished but totally ineffective BS artists. On the other, you have Donald Trump, who's presented as the exact opposite, decisive and genuine. And then you have the media and the left, who are accused of being hypocritical and having selective outrage. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. You know, this commentary gives us a really clear story, a world of villains versus a hero who says what he means. It's simple, it's powerful. But it makes you wonder, right? When politics gets boiled down into a simple good guy versus bad guy story, what are the messy, complicated details that we might be missing?